All right, welcome back to Law and Crime Report. My name is Bob Bianchi. I'm going to be your host today. We've got a lot of great topics on the line, and we're going to kick it off with the great Brian Ross, who's an investigator with our Law and Crime Network team on the Jason Carter case. First of all, I haven't seen you in a while, Brian. Happy New Year to you, sir.
And to you, Bob, you're looking good this afternoon.
Thank you, my friend. I know we have a little bit of a delay, Brian, so just kick it off. What is going on with this interesting Jason Carter case where he was acquitted in a criminal trial for killing his mother, yet found liable for $10 million in a civil case? Brian, sounds to me a lot like the OJ case.
Absolutely, Bob. Great similarities. This is a family tragedy. Jason Carter, accused by his father, Bill Carter, of murdering his mother, Shirley Carter, in 2015. The similarities to OJ are this, that he was found guilty at the civil trial, but not at the criminal trial. But in this case, the civil trial took place first, where he was found guilty and liable in order to pay $10 million. And then because of that, he went to trial on the criminal charges, where he was found not guilty. So now his lawyers are going to the Iowa Supreme Court this afternoon to argue he should get a new trial because evidence that came out at the criminal trial would have absolved him during the civil trial if it had been presented to the jury that case. I talked earlier this week with both Jason Carter and his wife, Shelley. Jason and Shelley, thank you very much for being here. What are your expectations and hopes from this Supreme Court hearing?
Well, we're hoping that they'll either throw it out or at least overturn the ruling for the civil and give us a new trial. Our main hopes are just to have it thrown out altogether, but at the least get a new trial.
Not guilty. Is that your verdict, ladies and gentlemen?
You were found not guilty in the criminal trial, but still the civil trial verdict is hanging over you. What's it been like to live with that? Shelley and Jason, you can answer both.
I don't know. It's just like a monkey that's always on your back. And, it's just so wrong and so heartbreaking.
It's really important that our children see how we've never given up. And we will never give up. I'll fight this to the bitter end. There's no doubt about that. Until this is overturned or something's done different, just have to keep on putting up a huge fight.
Carter's appeal will be argued by Allison Kanye, making the case that there is new evidence that came out during Carter's criminal trial about other possible suspects.
Brian, there are 6 different bases for this appeal, but there's one that we're focusing on in particular, and that is the fact that the civil jury did not have access to the same evidence that the criminal jury had access to. After the civil trial concluded in December of 2017, Jason was charged with homicide. And at that point, we began to receive discovery from the state, which showed us that there were a number of other viable suspects with multiple reports that corroborated each other that had not been adequately investigated by law enforcement. That formed the basis of a lot of our testimony and evidence offered in the criminal trial. The civil jury did not have that same opportunity. We think it is only fair and just that Jason be given an opportunity to present all of the evidence to this civil jury and then have them make a decision.
Did Jason have to go on trial again? Is that more than you think he can bear?
Jason is extremely tough. He's been through more than anyone I know in 6 years. And I think he will do whatever it takes to continue to work towards clearing his name. Obviously, he's been acquitted. That's the most important part. But I don't worry about Jason getting tired. He was accused of murdering his mother. That's one of the most horrific things you could ever possibly be accused of. And of course, he wants to fight until the bitter end to prove his innocence, whether it's in a civil courtroom or a criminal courtroom.
So this civil trial verdict still hangs over his head in a way.
Absolutely. It's a $10 million civil judgment. Bill Carter has shown that he intends to try and collect it if he can. How could that not hang over somebody's head?
Has there been any attempt to sort of settle this out of court?
No, I don't think either party would agree to any kind of settlement. Jason would certainly never agree to anything that required him to admit that he murdered Shirley, because he didn't. And Bill Carter seems convinced that Jason was responsible, even despite the quick acquittal that we achieved in the criminal court. I don't think settlement is a possibility for either of these parties.
Jason, have you talked with your father at all since you were found not guilty?
No, I haven't. I've seen him in passing. We farm right down the road from each other, so it's kind of hard not to see each other. You know, just driving by in the vehicle or tractor, combine, whatever have you. Uh, it's inevitable. We see each other in passing, but it's funny because one day he'll wave, and the next, you get a cold shoulder. But it goes both ways.
Jason, he told us that he has tried to commit suicide at least 4 separate times.
I've heard that he has tried 7 or 8 times to commit suicide, and yeah, I don't understand that. I mean, it's just it's terrible.
Brian, I was with the family for 25 years before this happened. And Shirley was like my mom, and Billy was like my dad. That is not the man we know. The man we know had more strength and honor and dignity. That is not the man we know. But that's the man he's become. And it's sad.
After you were found not guilty, was there any new effort to find who was in fact guilty since you were cleared by the jury?
We've asked the local prosecutor and law enforcement to look into the people, that should be held responsible for this, or the people that we believe are responsible. And we were told that nothing would ever happen. No one was going to look into anything.
Arguing on the other side today in the Iowa Supreme Court will be Bill Carter's lawyer, Mark Weinhardt. He told me that he is confident the court will turn down this request. The civil court ruled on this and decided that evidence should not be presented to the jury. So it's a family tragedy, Bob. It's a sad situation, a farm family torn apart by this murder. If Jason Carter maintains if he is given a new trial, he's ready for it. He said, bring it on, Bill. Bob?
Yeah, Brian, something that strikes me about this case as a trial lawyer and having been involved in cases where there's both a companion criminal and civil case is, typically speaking, the criminal case goes first. I'm dealing with that right now, where the civil case said basically you're held up until the criminal case is over. This was reversed, which brings to mind, Brian, that in a civil case, sometimes the defendant can be called to testify. He could have been called to testify, which could have hurt him in the criminal case where he has a right to remain silent. Do you have any insight as to how this got flipped around from the normal way? And by the way, did he testify in a civil case?
He did testify in depositions in advance of the civil case. What happened was that the criminal process was going so slowly that the father, Bill Carter, decided to take matters into his own hands. Convinced that his son was guilty of the murder, he hired his own private detectives, filed the lawsuit, and went ahead. And it was a day and a half after the verdict in the civil trial where Jason Carter was found guilty. A day and a half later that the criminal charges were then filed, and he was arrested on the charge of first-degree murder. So that's how it broke down.
Wow, crazy. Brian, I'm hearing that what they're trying to say is that the civil case went first, then the criminal case occurred where he was acquitted. There was information that came out in the criminal case that could have benefited him in the civil court. But did I hear you say that the civil court judge said that additional evidence would not have been admitted in the civil trial?
That's exactly what Mark Weinhardt will be arguing today before the Supreme Court, that the civil trial judge ruled on this, that information was out there. And essentially the information is that there were other people with criminal records in the community who were possible suspects. There were tips about them. Investigators say they ran down all those leads and not determined that anybody else was responsible for the murder other than Jason. His alibi at the time was that he was seen on video at a grain silo about an hour away of the supposed time of the murder, loading up and unloading his corn into the silo. And then the time of death became the issue in the trial. And in the end, the jury accepted the fact that there were parts of the investigation that did not proceed in aggressive ways, and that therefore Jason was not guilty.
Interestingly, Brian, as we all know from the OJ reference, the standard of proof in a criminal case is proof beyond a reasonable doubt to 12 jurors that have to have a unanimous verdict. And in civil court, it's by a preponderance of the evidence, which is a much lower standard, often referred to as more likely than not. Is there a sensibility here that they're trying to argue that since he was acquitted in the criminal case, he therefore should be acquitted in the civil case, which has that lower standard? Are they arguing that too?
That's one of the side arguments. The essential argument is the information about these other possible suspects. They essentially allege that the state was in on the whole thing, that they pushed Bill Carter to bring the civil charges and held back some of the evidence. That'll be one of the facts in dispute as they argue today before the Iowa Supreme Court.
Yeah, and he received a $10 million judgment. And I'm just curious, Brian, if you have any insight into whether or not, judgment is a judgment, but sometimes it's just a piece of paper if there's no ability to collect. Is there a lot of money in this family? Is he capable of paying that kind of judgment?
Well, some of it, the Iowa farmers are land rich and cash poor. They have lots of land and equipment that if they were forced to sell it all, might be able to raise that amount. It's a nightmare, though, according to Shelley and Jason Carter, that Bill continues to pursue this, demanding payment of the $10 million. And Bill Carter, it's sort of a sad situation. He lost his wife of so many years, Shirley, and he was hoping that somehow they would leave a life of retirement and leave the farm to Jason. The argument in the court was that Jason couldn't wait and actually didn't like his mother, apparently calling her to friends a bitch. Bob?
Well, Brian Ross investigates. You are the best, Brian, a real pro. Love having you here. Always love when we have a segment. You know it inside and out, brother. We're going to say goodbye to Brian. We got some more guests that are going to be coming up on the other end of the break because we're going to kick it off with presidential pardons or lack thereof. We'll be right back.
There's been a show on Netflix called Tiger King.
Yeah.
And the man who's the star of this is a former zoo owner who's serving a 22-year prison sentence. He's asking you for a pardon, saying he was unfairly convicted. Your son yesterday jokingly said that he was going to advocate for it, and I was wondering if you've seen the show and if you have any thoughts on pardoning Joe Exotic.
Which son? It must be Don.
It was.
I had a feeling it was Don. Is that what he said? I don't know. I know nothing about it. He has 22 years for what? What did he do?
He allegedly hired someone to murder an animal rights activist, but he said that he didn't do that, and he was.
Do you think he didn't do it? Are you on his side?
Well,
Are you recommending a pardon?
No, I'm not advocating anything.
As a reporter, you're not allowed to do that. You'd be criticized by these. Would you recommend a pardon?
I'm not weighing in on Tiger
I
King.
don't think you would. I don't think you would. Go ahead. You have a question? I'll take a look. Is that Joe Exotic? That's Joe Exotic.
Well, that tiger did not have 9 lives. And I'm going to tell you, somebody that's going to be my guest is going to be upset I said it because I stole his line when we were on break to talk about that. We'll have him on in a second. But guys, there's the president joking around about the Tiger King. We can finally put to rest that Joe Exotic is not going to get a presidential pardon. Always reminds me of that movie Idiocracy, which I love. But there were 73 other pardons as well as 70 commutations. Let me bring on my guest. The first one, the star of the line, the tiger didn't have 9 lives, is my good friend, Mike Koribanics. He is a law and crime legal analyst, former prosecutor. We serve together as prosecutors, and we also work as co-defendants on cases right now. He has a criminal defense practice here in New Jersey, and he is a certified New Jersey Supreme Court trial attorney, one of only 250 out of, God help us, over 90,000 lawyers in the state of New Jersey. And we also have John Delatorre is with us. He's a licensed psychologist out of Arizona and Texas, psychological consulting services out of Mesa, a forensic psychologist, and provides therapy and assessment and risk assessment for adult offenders and general risk assessments. Always love having John and both of these guys on the show. All right, Mike, I'm going to go to you. You came up with the line that he didn't have 9 lives, the Tiger King. We could talk a little bit about that, even though it wasn't likely that that pardon was going to occur. But other pardons did, Mike, and other commutations did occur. Everybody was talking about the idea there could be self-pardon for the president, that he may pardon his children. He may pardon those people that were at the insurrection riot rally, if you will. What do you think about, in the end, it kind of went out in a whimper in my mind with regard to what everybody was anticipating. What do you think, Mike?
Bob, I've got to tell you, you and I, as you mentioned, we have experience in the courtroom. We have prosecuted people and we have defended people. As a criminal defense attorneys, it's just very, very hard to accept all these pardons. When we are daily in federal court, we see our clients subject to all these strict sentencing guidelines, and yet people who really are not serving an unjust sentence, which is what this is meant to be. A pardon is meant to correct a wrong. And these just seem like grants and thank yous, and it really is upsetting from a criminal defense attorney standpoint when you see this happening.
Yeah, you're right, Mike, and that has traditionally how it's been used, but we had a non-traditional president for sure. Let's go to a clip of the presidential pardon attorney, because there's an actual office in the White House with respect to those who vet these pardons. Let's take a look.
I was actually surprised not to see President Trump's name listed. I had thought that he would probably go ahead and test the limits of the Constitution and its pardon powers. The fact that it has never been done before, but we have seen preemptive pardons in the past, one of the most famous being President Nixon. In that situation, he did resign and then the vice president pardoned him. But there's nothing that could stop a president or anyone in the future, another president, from doing a preemptive self-pardon. So I was definitely surprised. Now, I've heard some commentators and other legal analysts suggest that perhaps he could have pardoned himself, but kept it a secret. But given what we've seen with his characteristics, I don't think that he would keep it a secret if, in fact, he did do a preemptive self-pardon.
All right, that is Tammy Allison. I apologize. She is a presidential pardon attorney. John, let me go to you. I mean, I always love having you on because you give us that little psychological angle to things. So have you thought about in any way, shape, or form anything about the psychological aspect of this whole pardon process and how it was playing out and all the fear that everybody had about craziness and pardons? I mean, is there anything to glean from that from a psychological point of view?
I think a lot of people were concerned based on his previous behavior, how he was going to be towards the end of his presidency, in particular this pardon issue. But I think we need to look more closely at the situation that he found himself in at the time. And so I'm thinking that a lot of these pardons were pardons that he was probably going to do, but some of the splashy ones, like himself, like family members, like Joe Exotic, those were never really on the table because of how he's still a politician at heart. And I think he still wants to have some life in politics and in the political world. And had he done some of these things, I think a lot of the Senate Republicans, a lot of the House Republicans probably would have turned on him. And so I'm thinking that it has a little bit more to do with saving face and then coming back at a later time more than him just not wanting to engage in theatrics.
Yeah, Mike, there is reporting out there that is saying that on Saturday night, he was with his attorney, Pat Cipollone, and others who were trying to convince him not to do any of the more wild pardons. He always was fascinated, the president, we're told, with the self-pardon aspect of it. But to John's point, it was pragmatism. It was transactional at the end that he may have been concerned how the senators would have responded with respect to the impeachment proceeding, as well as the fact that once you pardon yourself, you no longer have the right to remain silent, at least with regard to the federal prosecution side. How do you think that all played into the ultimate decision to do what I think we can say instinctually the president wanted to do?
Well, that's a whole nother realm of instincts that this president had possessed. The thing is this, Bob, is that I think at the end of the day, he realized that his threat was just a threat. I understand that people make arguments, but the Constitution was written over 200 years ago. While it is meant to be literally read, it's also meant to adjust and be interpreted. They have an exception. You can't pardon yourself if you're going to get impeached. It's right in Article 2, Section 2, Clause 1, that you can't pardon yourself if it comes to impeachment. I think that any court with any reasonable interpretation of that clause would say, listen, this is not where someone could become president and just do whatever they want and violate the law. There's no way that the intention of the Constitution meant to do that. So therefore, I think in addition to being a losing proposition and a bad look, basically saying I'm guilty, so I got to pardon myself, I think that they realized that this would just be a waste of time, and it really risk reward. He finally understood.
John, I got to ask you from a psychological standpoint. Now, I've been doing legal analysis for many, many years, and only in the last 4 years have I seen the politicization of that legal analysis. Democrats, Republicans, they tend to be falling on whatever side they're for or against. And when you give legal analysis like Mr. Koribanics just did right now, there's going to be some people that are be happy to hear it and some people that aren't happy to hear it, simply because whether it supports one side or the other. Are we ever going to be able to come to a place where facts and law and giving explanations as to the way things normally go will just be accepted as being the truth, as opposed to it being, it's either you're on my side with your legal analysis or you're on the other side, and it's a binary choice? Is that going to end?
I don't think it's ever truly going to end. And I'm not entirely, I think it's taken to an extreme as of late, but I'm not sure that we actually want it to end, because if we're always on one side or the next, then there's no discourse in the middle. And so I think as a society, we would rather have discourse. We'd rather talk to each other than just fall on one side or the next. So I don't think it's ever truly going to change, because we're still heavily polarized as a society. But I don't think we want it to just be all one way or all another way. We need to find something in the middle where we can talk to each other, but still hold opinions that we value.
Yeah, I agree with that. But, you know, I laughed at the phrase when it first was mentioned that people believe in quote unquote alternate facts. And that to me is the biggest problem. The discourse isn't the issue. It's just that we can't come to a unified set of facts that seem relatively objective to most, but are politicized in the eyes on both sides of the equation. Guys, we've got to take a quick move to Fotis Dulos, who is back in the news again. As you know, he was accused in the disappearance and murder of his wife. He later committed suicide. But this investigation is not over. Let's take a listen to what the police are doing with regard to continuing to search for the body of the victim in the case, which has to date still not been found.
As many of you are aware, over the past day or so, our Western District Major Crime Squad detectives have been on the property, following up on leads and continuing to investigate the disappearance of Jennifer Dulos. Again, this investigation is still active and ongoing. At this point, we do not have any updates to provide to the public, and we do require or request that any updates moving forward or any requests for information moving forward be directed to the Chief State's Attorney's Office. That will be able to provide you with any significant updates or significant updates to the investigation. And at this point, that's what we have to say regarding the investigation. Our main goal is to, again, work towards providing the family of Jennifer Dulos some closure, and our detectives will continue to work tirelessly in the direction of doing so. Thank you all.
Right. So within a couple of days ago, the police actually had an excavator that was brought to the Dulos property home, and they had actually employed the services of an individual named Perry's his last name. Perry. I'll find out what his last name is. But anyway, he's referred to as the bone finder. And he uses this groundbreaking technology with regard to trying to find things that are underneath the earth. And there were 4 locations that were identified. We don't know what was or was not taken, or if there were any developments with respect to that. And again, Mike, this investigation is just vexing to the police, because they are desperately trying to find this body. There was blood inside the home, Mike, but you can see that the investigators are continuing to search. Why do you think it took them this amount of time to start using excavators and bringing in individuals like the bone finder at this late stage?
Well, Bob, as we know, whenever you hire experts to go to that level, you have exhausted all the basic groundwork of investigation to see if you have the proofs to get to where you need to get to. So it appears there must have been a lot of blocks and a lot of things they couldn't find. So now they're going to the highest levels. The one question it may be, which I do not know, is my understanding is this property was owned by the husband, who has since committed suicide, I believe. Maybe one of the things where they couldn't get enough proof to get a search warrant to enter the property, and now they have. I don't know that, but that could be a very major factor on what took so long.
Yeah, doctor, there is still a charged defendant in the case. There's actually a lawyer that's charged, as well as the girlfriend of Fotis Doulos that was definitely, it seems, and certainly alleged, tampering with evidence, but that still doesn't necessarily put you as the person who actually committed the murder. And I've personally handled many cases in which people were helping with the cleanup and disposal of human remains, but weren't actually involved in the murder itself. There's so much nuance in what was going on here. What is your assessment as to, like, if they were to hire you, what would you be telling the police you need to be looking for, looking to do, or how to go about investigating this case from a psychological forensic point of view?
Well, I would have hoped that they would have hired me before Doulos committed suicide, because he's the only one that knows actual accurate information as to what happened to his wife. But if they hired me now, I think I want to take a look at the crime scene as it was staged. I mean, this idea that 4 places in the yard are possible areas where bones could have been found, it seems a little too much, right? I don't think that he was the kind of person that would have spread remains everywhere. And so I would definitely need to take a more clinical look at the area that the crime was committed. Take a look more at what the victim's time frame was, what Doulos's time frame was for that day, and possibly even for 48 hours, along with Michelle Troconis. And where was she? What kinds of things were these people doing before they ended up in this situation where someone died? We have to look at the behaviors of someone. And as they're going through their day-to-day, something happens in which all of a sudden now they're going to start being targeted towards committing and then getting away with murder. And those are very different behaviors for everybody. So I would want to be looking at what they had been doing for at least the 48 hours previous.
Okay, I'm not sure if we're going to a break right now. Okay, all right. Well, I did have one question with Micah, but I'll just wrap it up with this. You don't have a body. You have a situation in which the family is going to want resolution and to be able to properly dispose of the remains of the victim in this case. I don't know if at some point in time the prosecutor doesn't go to Michelle Troconis and say, it's time to talk, and maybe we'll cut you a break. We're going to be back, and on the other side of the break, Danny Masterson, that 70s star, is back in the news with some major court developments. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back to the Law and Crime Report. Danny Masterson is back in the news. That 70s show star is now being charged with 3 counts of forcible rape that could land him up to 45 years in state prison. There was an arraignment, and that's the first step in the process. And it's taken all this time for many reasons due to delays and COVID and so on and so forth. He's entered pleas of not guilty. Let's take a listen to his attorney just after he had pled not guilty on behalf of his client.
Your Honor, we'd like to put this case out as much as possible. We're lacking a lot of discovery. We can't prepare for any preliminary hearing without much more discovery. And we've got COVID, so we're looking to put this out as long as we can.
We did have a discussion off the record with respect to potential scheduling. I advised all counsel that I'm just simply going to sign the matter and they can discuss further dates now that Mr. Masterson has been arraigned.
Okay, so Mike Koribanics, obviously a significant period of time has gone by with respect to a very basic court procedure where you enter a plea of not guilty. It's formally docketed on the record, and the case starts to move and progress towards a trial at that point in time if the individuals cannot come to a resolution. Very interesting aspect of this case, Mike, especially in light of the report that we just had from Brian Ross, is there is also a companion civil case in this particular action where they're saying, which is common, we want to hold off on the civil case until the resolution of the criminal case. Whereas in that other case that I talked to Brian, it was done exactly opposite. What are your thoughts about everything that's going on with regard to this case, how the lawyer is acting, which is part of the thing that he is doing, is saying he wants no cameras in court every single time that there is an appearance or a proceeding. The lawyer does not want that recorded, indicating that it's tainting a jury pool, and adding to that, if it weren't for the media in the first place, Masterson wouldn't have even been charged. Mike, what are your thoughts about all that?
Well, the thing is Bob, I really think those are old arguments in this day of technology of, the media, it's going to influence a potential jury pool. That's impossible to avoid these days with Twitter, social media, things of that nature. That's number one. Number two is, this whole thing with, I was very shocked to hear about that Iowa case where a civil case proceeded first. It's almost, at least in New Jersey here, in my experience, it's almost been a no-brainer that because of the deep constitutional issues in the criminal case, you stay the civil case. You hold it off till you see what happens in the criminal case. I think that for many reasons, as you pointed out earlier when you were speaking with Brian, the number one reason is in a criminal case, you have a Fifth Amendment right to remain silent under the Constitution. In a civil case, they have the power of the subpoena to make you testify. If you choose not to testify, at least in the districts I'm familiar with, in the civil case, they can draw a reasonable inference as to your liability because you've exercised your constitutional right. I think you need to be very careful, and as a criminal defense attorney, you need to exhaust yourself to stop that civil case from proceeding first.
Yeah, I agree completely. Doc, what do you think about also its involvement with Scientology in all of this? Do you have an opinion about that? I mean, there's been a lot of controversy about Scientology and the manner in which they treat their people that want to report things that are not going well or maybe potentially illegal. We know that from Ms. Remini. So what do you think about their involvement in all this?
Yeah, I think it's a slippery slope. We don't know exactly what the Church of Scientology is using to adjudicate this whole process. We have no idea who they're using to arbitrate this case. We know nothing about what exactly it is that they're using as for how they're going to render their decision. So I think it's a slippery slope here. I understand this need that he's maybe a member of the church and feels compelled that only that religious belief can hold him accountable for his actions. However, we have a set of laws in this country, and we have a judicial court system in this country for a reason. And so I think it's a very slippery slope to include them even in an arbitration stage. But I think it's a very slippery slope for us to be including them in adjudicating what is a crime in that jurisdiction. So I'm not sure that it's that good of an idea.
Yeah, all sorts of issues with regard to potential tampering. Mike, same question to you. It's a strange involvement in all of this, especially given that the church has been under such pressure that they've mind manipulated people for so many years. I don't know enough about it. I don't know. But what do you think about the Scientology piece to this?
Well, I think that's a piece that's very complicated because of the fact is, Scientology, things of that nature have to have some sort of legal status for them to proceed further and bring in that aspect. I just think that they better be careful as to, from the prosecution point, as to how much risk they are at for purposes of appeal and things of that nature by exploring this aspect of the case. Bob, you and I were both prosecutors, you were the prosecutor one time, and like we always say is, you've got to keep it simple, go with your strongest evidence, and do not cloud the interest or the issues.
Excellent advice, Mike. Okay, listen, we got to switch gears a little bit. Very sad case. An Instagram influencer, Alexis Sharkey, was found on the side of a road naked. And at first, the authorities were saying that there was no evidence of trauma. She's a beautiful, beautiful woman, and that she showed no evidence of trauma. And then the family was like, wait a second, you have a naked woman in the bushes on the side of a road found by a sanitation worker. There's foul play. Well, ultimately, the cause of death has been determined to be strangulation. It has been ruled a homicide. She's got 25 Instagram followers. John, Doc, these social media things that go on make it so much more difficult for us to solve cases today because you have such a public footprint out there that it could be anybody. And apparently since November, they really haven't come close to any leads with respect to this. So what are your thoughts about this case from a forensic psychological point of view?
Something in my own private practice that I've been doing is social media mining in the private referrals that I get. I think it's heavily important that we explore who she was online, because that gives us a different kind of potential suspect pool to who would actually be able to have access to her. Yes, she puts herself out online for anybody to see, but social media is designed in such a way to keep that sort of electronic distance. So I wouldn't be surprised if her social media accounts play a big role in finding who the perpetrator of this crime actually is.
Yeah, and Mike, she was married. There is an allegation out there by some of the family. They think the husband may be involved in it. But can you give us an insight, having been a person that's investigated cases, the difficulty in solving them as time goes on? I think one of the most sticky homicides I ever investigated took us 9 months. And if it wasn't for the grace of God and going back into the file and kind of coming up with a completely different approach, we wouldn't have been able to make that arrest. But it would seem to me forensics aren't really coming through on this one because so much time has gone by already. They would have been able to do something.
Well, I agree with you, Bob. As you know, it's, the best evidence is your freshest evidence. And those things that really can lead to a solid, factually accurate theory of the case. It's almost, you start backwards. You start where you found the body, you look around that area, then you try to figure out how did it get to that area. And once you start going at a very slow, there's nothing, magical or mind-boggling. It's very like, the beginner's mind. You start at each little step and take that. The problem is if it takes you a long time to get to your next step, you can go and lose your path and the case just falls apart. Case like this, it seems like circumstantial evidence is going to be the strongest since we have no eyewitnesses. And because of that, you need fresh evidence. This is going to be a very difficult prosecution, but they should still keep after it and see where it leads them.
Yeah, Doc, I'm going to just go through one quick question with you on this. My experience has shown me that when you have a situation and it's sticky and you can't resolve the case or solve it, you need to move it completely out of the hands of the individuals who were originally investigating the case, because there is this tunnel vision that gets created investigatively where they may have an idea or think it's in this direction, and all evidence that comes in that contradicts it, they kind of disregard and put it on the side, and all evidence that supports what they say, they want to accept that. I don't fault police for it. It's part of the human nature to do stuff like that. What are your thoughts about maybe moving it out so you get a fresh set of eyes with a neutral perspective on the case?
Yeah, absolutely. What you're describing is called confirmation bias. And I think it will be important to let a different team of investigators take a look at what's going on. Everyone is influenced by the material that they're told. So having a fresh set of eyes, take a look at everything that's going on, maybe even reinterpret what the evidence is trying to say will certainly benefit having justice for this individual.
Okay, awesome, guys. Great commentary as always. Is it even possible that with today's security protocols and everything we are doing to try to protect ourselves, especially in the air with airports that you could possibly surreptitiously, that is, without the knowledge of anyone, including law enforcement authorities, be living there for 3 months? We'll talk about it on the other end of the break. Okay, welcome back to the Law and Crime Report. Like I said before this break, is it possible you could be living in an airport, let's say an airport like O'Hare in Chicago, a major airport, for 3 months, that you're able to sneak yourself in, get into secured areas, and be able to live there unbeknownst to any law enforcement officials? Well, that is what I believe I'm saying the name right, Aditya Singh, 36 years old, did. There's a picture of the gentleman right there. He was in a restricted area, and he's now been arrested for theft. He basically had a United Airlines badge that they say was stolen, but he says he found it, and he was using that basically to stay at the airport. He was originally coming from Los Angeles back in October, where he flew into O'Hare. And I love this. When I get to my guests, I got to talk about this quote, because if you've been doing this long enough, you read a transcript, and a lot of times it doesn't have the emotion in it that like what really went on in the courtroom. But here's a quote from the judge when they were in a bail hearing. So if I understand you correctly, you're telling me that an unauthorized, non-employee individual was living within a secure part of O'Hare Airport from October 19th, 2020 to January 16th, 2021, and was not detected? Mike, you knew that that was a rhetorical question of, you've got to be kidding me.
I believe that, Bob. I also believe this. I don't, in my gut, which a lot of us trial attorneys rely on often, I cannot believe that he was undetected or unknown. I think what I've learned about it is he had some sort of fear, a strong fear of COVID. He didn't want to get on the plane. I believe that some people knew he was living there. They tapped into their basic goodness. I believe people have basic goodness, and because and just allowed him to exist till he was ready to go. I can't believe that this could go so long without people knowing and being aware of it. I think what might have happened was the people who knew it weren't in power to investigate or had law enforcement powers, and that's when I think this got detected.
You know, Mike, that is an excellent point, and it almost reminds me in our younger days when we were assistant prosecutors, how they used to arrest one of the individuals, I won't mention his name, simply because he needed a warm place to stay in the winter, and would allow him with his orange jumpsuit to go out across the street to get Dunkin' Donuts coffee and bagels and stuff for the corrections officers. You can't make it up, but that is a fact, Mike. I know you remember that. Doc, to Mike's point, you think that that's going on here? And moreover, do you have an assessment of this guy? To me, he's probably got some mental health issues, that doesn't have a place to stay, things of that nature. I'm not anticipating punishment will be tough on this guy.
Yeah, no, to Mike's point, I have a hard time believing that no one knew. If security didn't know, then I'm concerned about the security at the O'Hare Airport. But for sure, the custodial staff knew. If there's one group of individuals that would be able to clock someone not having left a restricted area, it would be the custodial staff. So I don't think he ever truly went undetected. But what I will say about him is this idea that he's afraid of COVID. Well, then why not just drive back home? Then he wouldn't have to worry about COVID at all. So I think there might be something else underlying this fear. Perhaps it's a mental health issue. Perhaps there's some other kind of anxiety disorder that will probably need to be checked out by someone just to make sure that he's doing okay.
Yeah, Mike, we have a short period of time, but I don't know how you're feeling in your practice, but we've been talking about our colleagues. In fact, I've talked to you about this. We are seeing more and more calls coming in with people with mental health and addiction issues, especially during this COVID-19 time. I know I've spoken to Doc about this before. We got a short period of time, like 15 seconds or less. Tell me, are you seeing that as well with these kind of off cases that we've been seeing lately?
Yeah, absolutely, Bob. Anybody facing a criminal accusation or charge generates anxiety in and of itself. Now you have this where you're hearing every day about death. Life has a possibility of coming to an end. There's such an awareness that how do you avoid that? I think it's just a natural progression.
Agree completely. Mike, guys, you were great as always. Thank you for your audience for watching us. Our regularly scheduled programming is coming up. You can find me at R Bianchi ESQ. Have a great rest of the week.